So I'm going to tell you now what is new in 2020 as far as GI endoscopy is concerned, and maybe give you a little glimpse as to what endoscopy has got in store for us in the future. As far as diagnostic GI endoscopy goes, all of us know that way back in 1950s, diagnostic endoscopy was relatively primitive, and we could diagnose a GI cancer for, say, for example, in the upper GI tract, only if the size of that cancer or the tumor was of the size of a cricket ball, that is, of more than 3 centimeter size. But today, the whole scenario has changed because of a tremendous evolution of diagnostic imaging technology, endoscopic imaging technology. And nowadays, we have endoscopes available by which only by a press of a button, we can study the internal lining of the upper or the lower GI tract with a high magnification and high resolution endoscopy. In fact, you see here, left side, the video is of the duodenum, where you can actually see the duodenal villi. You can see the small capillaries inside those villi. And if you zoom it even further, we can actually see the blood flowing inside the capillaries. Similarly, the right video is showing you the villus pattern of the terminal ileum. And today it is a routine for most of the endoscopy centers who use such type of high magnification and high resolution endoscopes that we always do a proper upper GI or a lower GI endoscopy and very, very carefully study the internal lining, the mucosa. And because of this ability, even a normal endoscope, we can get a magnification of almost 20 times than what it normally is. So anywhere between 10 to 20 times, and we can pick up even the minutest of pathologies. So because of this, what has happened is that the newer types of endoscopes, which are routinely used by most of the endoscopy centers in India, and of course in all the parts of the world, we can actually now start seeing the invisible, what we never used to see with the naked eye. We can actually see the things with by using a high magnification or a high resolution, and thereby we have started picking up early cancers. In fact, newer types of endoscopes have been introduced into the market by various companies. We have endoscopes which have been introduced by companies like Olympus, like Fujinon, and also by some other companies. Here is a classic example where there is an endoscope by which you can not only have high magnification, but we can have ultra high magnification. That means instead of just a 20 times magnification, we can have a magnification up to 450 times or 520 times by a special type of an endoscope, which is called also as the endocytoscope. And you see here, this endocytoscope can be passed through a normal gastroscope or through a gastroscope which is having a little wider channel. And by touching the endocytoscope to the mucosa, we can actually see the cells, and we can see the nuclei inside the cells because of this ultra high magnification endoscope. And by looking at the nuclei, we can actually make a differentiation whether there is dysplasia or whether there is early cancer which is affecting the mucosa of the upper or the lower GI tract. An additional feature which is now slowly coming into clinical practice is to aid the endoscopist to actually achieve a detection even if they cannot actually see the pathology. And this is by the use of artificial intelligence. And already 2 or 3 platforms of artificial intelligence have been incorporated into diagnostic endoscopy. This is the first platform which has been launched by Olympus, which has to be used along with the endocytoscope. So endocytoscope is already giving us ultra high magnification of more than 400 times that of a normal, what you can see. But in addition to that, by use of the EndoBrain, which is launched by the Olympus system, you can see here, only by focusing on the suspect area, this artificial intelligence software, which has been incorporated inside the processor, can actually tell us whether what you are seeing is likely to be neoplastic or whether it is non-neoplastic. So you see here on the screen itself, you can get an appearance whether there is neoplastic or non-neoplastic. and that will give you a guidance whether to take a particular biopsy or whether you want to directly proceed. You see a nodular surface or irregular rough surface on the mucosa, you focus the endocytoscope or touch the endocytoscope on that, do an ultra high magnification, and then by this artificial intelligence, which is the endobrain, if it tells you that this appears neoplastic, you can straight away go ahead, and if it is suitable, falls into the criteria, you can go ahead and do an endoscopic resection itself. Similarly, Fujinon has also launched another artificial intelligence system, which is called as the CAD-I system. And this is also using a special type of a software. And you can use the LCI and the BLI. And by this, you can pick up lesions which are not seen with the naked eye. Because as you are performing the colonoscopy, most of these artificial intelligence systems are presently launched mainly for colorectal endoscopy, that is for colonoscopy, to pick up small polyps or polyps which can be missed on a regular colonoscopic examination. And by this, you can achieve a high polyp detection rate. Not only that, but even if you find the polyp, you can focus on that polyp, and then by doing characterization, in addition to diagnosis, that system will tell you whether this polyp appears adenomatous, whether this polyp is hyperplastic, or whether the polyp is appearing like an invasive cancer. And another type of artificial intelligence system you see here is launched by a third company. You are actually performing the colonoscopic procedure, and as you are withdrawing the scope, one essential factor here is, of course, you need a very clean colon. But as you are withdrawing the scope, the software or the system itself is detecting whether there is a polyp, and you get a green type of a window there. And then you can focus your scope on that area, and then you can further characterize it and see whether that polyp is looking any suspicious, whether it is neoplastic or whether it is just a simple hyperplastic polyp, whether it requires a biopsy, it requires a resection, or it requires an endoscopic submucosal dissection. So as you see here, the main use of artificial intelligence presently in diagnostic endoscopy is to facilitate better pickup of lesions while you are performing the scopy. So thereby it becomes, the life of the endoscopist becomes extremely easy. The same situation, the same thing has been incorporated now in a biopsy forceps, and there have now been trials going on in some companies where a biopsy forceps itself can incorporate a probe, a mini probe, to which the artificial intelligence has been sort of incorporated. And when you are performing the procedure, you can actually do the procedure, and then when you open the biopsy forceps, through the biopsy forceps, this probe comes out. So what we do is we perform the procedure, and suppose you are finding a polypoid lesion, you can open the biopsy forceps, the probe comes out, it touches the polyp or touches that area, and on the system itself, you can come to know whether it is suspect, non-suspect. And then you can take a decision whether you can just do a biopsy of this lesion, or if the polyp is very tiny, take out the whole polyp with the biopsy forceps itself, or instead of using the biopsy forceps, if it is suspect, then you can just straight away inject it and go ahead and do a resection by using a snare. For example, here you can see you have taken a biopsy, then you can do a frozen section, you can check it out, and in case it is suspect, then you can go ahead and do a resection. Capsule endoscopy, that is, all of you know that many years back, capsule endoscopy was invented, and because of which it became possible for endoscopists to visualize the interior of the small intestine, which was not possible to reach by a normal upper GI or a lower GI scope. And today in 2020, already we have got the 5th generation capsule endoscope, and by which the capsule endoscope itself has got extremely good high resolution and high magnification. Of course, presently these capsules travel on their own. Capsules which are maneuverable from outside are still not available. However, a lot of research is going on because of initiation of the idea. You can see here, this is the famous physician from Britain who himself performed capsule endoscopy on him, and then from outside he rotated a magnet. You see here, he is rotating the magnet on the anterior abdominal wall, and with this he could actually move the capsule inside his intestinal tract. However, using this criteria, using this idea, now some companies have started developing a motorable capsule endoscope. You see here, this is the first prototype motorable capsule endoscope machine, where now what we can do is we can give the patient the capsule to swallow, and then the patient can lie down on this table, which is almost looking like a MRI machine, like a C-arm, and there are two joysticks, so the endoscopist can sit on the side, and by moving the joysticks you can move that C-arm type of a table which contains magnets, and by which you can actually maneuver the capsule the way wherever you want it to travel. Now this is almost under development. Within a few years this will come in commercial production and in clinical usage. So therefore, this small lacuna which a capsule endoscope had, of course, in addition to being a therapeutic in nature, but diagnostic, now the capsule, probably we will be able to move the capsule wherever we want. Similarly, as you all have know, that capsule endoscope is purely diagnostic in nature, and it can only diagnose a pathology, but you cannot treat the pathology through the capsule endoscope. But to overcome this lacuna, quite a few years back, the enteroscope was invented. The first was, of course, the double balloon enteroscope, which was invented by Yamamoto in 1999. And then the single balloon enteroscope was invented. Both the enteroscopes are extremely good. And one uses a single balloon technology, one uses a double balloon technology. But by this, the basic principle is that we are railroading the small bowel over our long enteroscope. And by this, going antegrade as well as retrograde, we can actually reach any part of the small bowel. However, once again, the problem is whether you use a single balloon technology or a double balloon technology. The problem of the balloon enteroscope was that for some physicians, for some endoscopists, this could become a little bit of a cumbersome technique. And that is exactly the reason why a new technique was invented. This was, of course, in a prototype stage many years back. However, now this is commercially available with a company from Olympus who have made a motorized spiral enteroscope. And here you can see this motorized spiral sheath is loaded on the enteroscope, which is attached to that motor. And now by going inside in antegrade or a retrograde fashion, all that we have to do is to step on a pedal, and then the sheath on top of it, which has got a spiral, it starts rotating. And so instead of doing a manual rotation and trying to do pushing and pulling and inflating and deflating the balloons, only by doing this rotating spiral device, this is a motorized spiral enteroscopy, we can have a very easy passage ahead. And you see here that the intestine almost gets pulled up on the enteroscope, on your endoscope, and because of which the passage through the intestine becomes easy. The problem with this is that sometimes, because of the spiral, we can create some contusion, we can create some trauma to the mucosa. Therefore, while coming back and when we are visualizing for pathology, especially in those patients for occult GI bleeding, there is a possibility that you may have a false positive, because there could be a little bit traumatic problem. It leads to a little bit of oozing, little bit of lesions in the mucosa, which could be because of the spiral. However, this has again made the life of the endoscopist extremely easy, and spiral enteroscopy is going to make small bowel endoscopy relatively simple. The technology is not going to stop, and scientists and technologists or some companies are already in the process of trying to develop automatic motorized spiral device. And here you can see such type of a device will be manufactured now very soon, by which we will have an endoscope by which we have to just put it inside the rectum, and then by press of a pedal, the endoscope itself will travel all throughout the colon. And you see here, invention of the iSnake robotic endoscope is already in the process, and within a few years such type of endoscopes will be available either for upper GI or lower GI endoscopy. But mainly I think this will be used even for small bowel endoscopy, that is enteroscopy. Presently only a colonoscope is being developed, which is iSnake robotic endoscope, and this is the basic technology. where you have to put it inside the anus, and then by press of a pedal, the colonoscope itself will travel. You see here by moving the joysticks, you can actually move and make the colonoscope go in whichever direction we want it to travel. Along with diagnostic endoscopy, interventional endoscopy has also made tremendous amount of strides. You see here, this is just a graph which I wanted to show you. We started off with foreign body removal, then GI bleeding in early 1960s, then polypectomy, then ERCP, removal of CBD stones, then the removal of pancreatic stones, or treating pancreatic strictures, treatment of chronic pancreatitis. Somewhere in mid 1990s, the metal stents were invented that again made the life of endoscopist extremely easy. Of course, ESWL added another dimension along with endoscopic ultrasonography and interventional EUS. And the last 10 years, we have witnessed different growth of interventional endoscopy, where endoscopists have started treading into unknown zones by the further progression of EMR, ESD, and third space endoscopic procedures. And now, in fact, the era is going to slowly evolve where endoscopists are slowly turning into endoscopic surgeons. Colonic polyps are extremely simple to remove. It has become a routine for any endoscopist today to remove colonic polyps, whether they are pedunculated polyps or whether they are sessile polyps. Pedunculated polyps, now even if the stalk is very thick, whether it is long, what we do nowadays is to ligate the pedunculated polyp first by putting a detachable snare. You see here it is a nylon loop. We put it around the stalk by which we strangulate the polyp, and after which we can very safely cut off the polyp without the risk of having a post-polypectomy bleeding. Of course, in spite of this, the polyp bleeds, we have got excellent instruments like clips by which we can clip the stalk or we can clip the bleeding vessel, and thereby we can remove the polyp. In case of sessile polyps, what we do routinely now is to use a technique of giving an injection in the submucosa by using a little bit of a diluted solution of normal saline with some methylene blue or indigo carbene. Sometimes we can add gelofuse into it, which stays more in the submucosal layer, and we can do a very nice piecemeal resection of a sessile polyp, which is like this, where you are not suspecting an early cancer, but we can do this. And most of the polyps which are located in the colon, even if they are sessile, even if they are big, we can remove them by piecemeal resection. A very nice resection can be done by layer by layer. You can see here, you can remove part of the polyp and you see the margin, and then again we can give a little more injection and go ahead and remove it further. And by using this technique, we can achieve a complete resection. You see here, this is how we are going to resect it. And at the end of the resection, you see here, completely we can resect the polyp with the muscularis propria. And if you find that there are a few vessels which are on the floor, we can coagulate these vessels by using coag grasping forceps. And we can also coagulate the edge of the resection. Thereby, we can minimize the recurrence to almost zero after doing such a complete resection, piecemeal resection of a flat sessile colonic polyp. ERCP for bile duct stones, it is quite routine for most of the endoscopists now. And even for large stones, nowadays we use wonderful technology like this intraductal cholangioscopy, and this is by use of the single operator cholangioscope, which is the spyglass. Now we have got the video spyglass, which is the spyglass BS. And here, see here, even if you have a stone in the bile duct, which is large, which is impacted, even if you have a Mersey syndrome, or even if you have intrahepatic stones, we can crush the stones like this under vision, almost as easy as playing a video game. Of course, we have to take certain precautions to reduce the chances of adverse events, chances of complications. We have to select the patient properly, and by using this technology, you see here on the slide on the left, even if the duct is packed with stones, you can pulverize it to very small fragments, and we can achieve a extremely good ductal clearance rate. Same is true with pancreatic stones. You see here in India, it is almost can be called as a pancreatitis country. Many of our patients have such type of large radiopaque stones. Some of them we can easily crush by using a extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy, and by doing an ESWL, we combine it by using ERCP. Of course, we have to select these patients properly. We have to make sure that this patient does not have an inflammatory head mass. These patients do not have multiple strictures. They fall into the category of endoscopy suitable patients. And then after doing ESWL, and if the stones are not radiopaque, we can directly perform an ERCP. We can perform a pancreatic sphincterotomy, as you can see here, where the pancreatic sphincterotomy is performed more towards the 2 o'clock direction. Already you can see some amount of pancreatic juice which is coming out. Small stones from the pancreatic duct are coming out. Then we perform a large balloon dilatation of the pancreatic sphincter. In pancreas, we dilate up to 1.2 centimeters, that is 12 mm CRE balloon. And by performing a balloon sphincteroplasty of the pancreatic sphincter, even if the patient has multiple pancreatic stones which are radiolucent, or you have pulverized radiopaque pancreatic stones, we can completely achieve a pancreatic ductal clearance almost in one sitting of ERCP, in case you have selected the patient properly. In, of course, radiopaque stones, one sitting of ERCP is usually not sufficient. We have to call these patients after placing a temporary 5 or a 7 French pancreatic stent, and after 3 months we do repeat ERCP. As I mentioned to you before, in 1995, treatment of luminal or ductal obstruction changed completely with the advent of metallic expandable stents. And today it is a routine feature for us to place expandable stents in the esophagus for advanced cancer, or you can place expandable stent in the duodenum for a duodenal block. Suppose you have an advanced pancreatic head cancer which is causing an obstruction of the duodenum, or antral cancer or a duodenal malignancy. Of course, self-expandable metal stent for palliation of obstructive jaundice in case of bile duct cancer, or it can also be used as a preoperative drainage in patients who are borderline operable pancreatic cancer or borderline operable lower bile duct cancer. But we want to reduce the jaundice, we can place a short, fully covered expandable stent. And also in patients of colonic obstruction, left-sided colonic obstruction, if the patient comes to us in acute colonic obstruction, we can tide over the crisis by placing a colonic stent. And then once you achieve a proper colonic decompression, the patient can directly undergo a single stage left-sided colectomy instead of performing a colostomy before and then performing a colectomy in a 2-stage surgical procedure. Well, as I mentioned to you, last 10 years has seen a total new change in interventional endoscopy. It all started with removing superficial lesions like this Barrett's metaplasia, and what we started doing 10 years back, 15 years back, by using a freehand technique. If we find dysplasia in Barrett's, only by using a simple snare, we can go ahead and resect a Barrett's metaplasia like this and send the whole specimen for histopathology. And if we find that we don't find a cancer, or even if it is a superficial cancer, intramucosal cancer, then such type of a treatment where you do a total resection of the Barrett's, you can achieve a R0 cure, especially if this is an early cancer. And similarly, if you find a cancer now in the stomach, now what we do is we perform a procedure which is called as endoscopic submucosal dissection, or ESD. Here you can see in the antrum of the stomach, there is a small lesion where we have diagnosed it as early cancer on high magnification, high resolution endoscopy. Sometimes it is not even necessary to take a biopsy. Only on the visual impression, by the characterization, by you see on either NBI or BLI, you can know that this appears to be a suspicious lesion or an early cancer. Then you can do a dissection like this. We give a submucosal injection of normal saline with gelofuscin, with methylene blue or indigo carbine. And by using a variety of knives, we can do a submucosal dissection. Here you can see that these are the circular muscle fibers of the stomach. That's the specimen area. And by using the knife, we are dissecting in this plane, and we are completely dissected out. And you see here en bloc resection of the early gastric cancer can be achieved if you have a suitable location, especially in the stomach or you have in the colon. But the first, for a beginner, for example, it is better to start from the antrum of the stomach or in the rectum, where you will be able to achieve a good endoscopic submucosal dissection. There is one thing, one procedure which has completely changed, and it is a landmark invention which was invented around 10 years back, and that was the invention of third space endoscopy in the form of peroral endoscopic myotomy. Today, for example, it has become a routine. There is sufficient amount of literature and sufficient experience all over the world where by use of the peroral endoscopic myotomy, we can achieve excellent results in those patients who suffer from achalasia cardia, whether it be type 1, type 2, or type 3. All that we need to do is we differ the length of the myotomy on the esophagus side, depending upon the subtype. In type 1, we do a short myotomy. In type 2, we do a medium myotomy of 7 centimeters. And type 3, we do a very long myotomy, 12 to 15 centimeters. So depending upon the subtype of achalasia, we perform a POEM procedure. You see here, these are the steps of the POEM. Entry into the submucosa, and this is third space endoscopy classic procedure. And by giving a submucosal cushion, we are making a cut on the mucosa. We enter into the submucosa. The first POEM procedure in India we performed in October 2012. Now we have more than 3,000 POEM procedures we have performed in our department. The results have been very gratifying. And after we have entered the submucosal plane, now this is the second step where we start dissecting in the submucosa. The most important part in POEM procedure is to remain as close to the circular muscle fibers as possible and go at right angles to the circular muscle fibers. So even if you have a tortuous esophagus, you won't miss the OG junction. And once we have reached the OG junction, then we start performing the myotomy. So we make the submucosal tunnel. You can see the submucosal tunnel here. This is the tunnel. And then we start the myotomy. You can either perform a posterior or anterior myotomy. Nowadays, most of us do a posterior myotomy. You see here, fiber by fiber, we can cut the fibers. You can see here, first cut the circular fibers. Then we also cut the longitudinal fibers. It depends upon your practice, what you are used to, what you are comfortable with. In fact, by this, we can achieve a complete myotomy right along the esophagus and especially the lower esophageal sphincter, 2 to 3 centimeters inside the stomach. And then all that we have to do is to close the mucosal incision by a series of clips. The same third space endoscopy procedure we can also use for removing submucosal tumors, the procedure which is called a submucosal tumor resection, submucosal STER, tumor endoscopic resection. You see here, we make a mucosal incision, we go inside the submucosal plane, and almost akin to underwater swimming, we keep on dissecting towards the tumor, and after we dissect a little bit ahead in the direction of the tumor starts appearing itself. Then we dissect the tumor out around all its areas, anteriorly from the mucosa, posteriorly from the muscle, and surrounding from the areolar tissue. So fiber by fiber, keep on injecting so as to create a proper plane, and the entire tumor, once it is dissected all around, we can catch the tumor in a snare and pull it out of the mouth. You see here, sometimes if the tumor is very big, then we can do a piecemeal dissection. We cut the tumor, park it in the stomach, again dissect ahead, again cut the tumor, park it in the stomach, so that you can take it out through the cricopharyngeal. However, tumors of almost 4 or 5 centimeter size can be easily pulled out through the cricopharynx. Once you have removed the tumor, this is the defect which you find inside the muscle layer, the muscularis propria. You go inside and achieve a proper hemostasis, and then come up and close the mucosa again, similar to the POEM, and after which you can achieve a complete tumor resection without the need of having to do a surgical procedure. GERD also now, endoscopists have started treating. In fact, in 2020, many patients of GERD who fall into the criteria of Hill's grade 1 and 2, who do not have a very wide hiatus hernia, we have a variety of techniques by which we can treat gastroesophageal reflux disease who are PPI dependent. Here, for example, the first procedure which we commonly performed, it's a very good procedure if you know how to do it, is the anti-reflux mucosal resection or ARMS procedure. And what we do is, in the ARMS procedure, we do a mucosal resection of the 2/3 of an area of the lesser curvature in a retroverted fashion just below the OG junction. And when you do 2/3 resection of the mucosa, this is the way we do it. This is done by the cap and the snare technique, the classic Inouye technique, where we again inject in the submucosa, and by sucking into this cap, we cut off the mucosa, and by piece we keep on cutting. I'll just show you what is going to be the end result. And after cutting, this is what you're going to see. You see here that this is a crescentic resection what we have performed of the mucosa. And after this, what happens is 1 month later, this is exactly what you are going to observe. So you see here that because of the constriction, it happens because healing happens by secondary intention. The gastroesophageal flap valve and the angle of hiss becomes enhanced. It almost appears as if you have done a laparoscopic fundoplication. So you see here, by performing the anti-reflux mucosal resection, if you have a patient of Hill's grade 1 and 2 who is on a PPI dependent situation, you can offer them the anti-reflux mucosal resection. You can go and do this. One thing you have to remember, that if you resect it too deep, you can easily create a perforation. So the feel is very important. So to make sure that there is a good lift in the mucosa, you inject sufficient amount of fluid in the submucosa, and you should not resect too much, because if you resect too much, you can create a concentric stricture. Of course, that is not a big of problem. In case you do develop a stricture, you can start doing a little bit of a balloon dilation 3 months after this procedure. Another wonderful instrument which we are using nowadays for GERD is the endoscopic full thickness plication device. You see here, this is called as the Gerdex procedure. This is the lax cardia. You see here, Hill's grade 2. And in this, we are going to use the Gerdex device. In this, we have to pass this device over a guide wire. And once the device is passed, you open the arms. There is a helix device in the middle of these two arms. You go there, and a proper area you have to identify, and you go inside full thickness inside this area, and you pull the ball in between the two arms, and you close the arms and fire it. So this is actually a stapling device. And by using this stapling device, now we have a substantial experience of using the Gerdex device. By using this, either you can push two clips, or if you apply this clip on the lesser curvature, even with one clip itself, you can achieve a proper tightening of the OG junction. You see here, before the procedure and after the procedure, this is how we can achieve an excellent tightening of the esophagogastric junction, and thereby it almost mimics as if we have performed endoscopic fundoplication. Well, endoscopy now has also entered into bariatrics, and even for obesity, there is a procedure now which we are following, by which we can do a procedure which is similar to that of a laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy, and that is an endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. So last few years, we have been performing this procedure of endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty, where by using this Apollo endosuturing device at the tip of the endoscope, we can actually plicate the greater curvature of the stomach, just proximal, starting proximal to the antrum of the stomach and coming up and stopping just proximal to the fundus. And you see here, by performing this procedure, we can achieve a suturing and tightening. And the main advantage of the endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty is that this procedure is extremely safe. It is easily reproducible. It does not have any complications. The issue is that because this procedure is done endoscopically, sometimes in the initial experience, your sutures may loosen up. So therefore, nowadays we have started taking reinforcing sutures, but the overall results of our technique and worldwide are by performing an ESG or endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty procedure. We have found we can achieve a total body weight loss of almost 15 to 20% at the end of 1 year. Now, this is sufficient to reduce the comorbidities in most of our patients. Well, in addition to the invention of diagnostic and interventional endoscopy, there is one more new invention which is slowly going to come into the Indian market. which is now just hit the markets and hit the clinical world in the Western society, in the Western world, and that is the use of disposable endoscopes. Now, this has been basically invented and launched mainly because of the chances of transmitting infection through complicated endoscopes, especially that of a duodenoscope. In many studies which were performed, there were some issues which happened in duodenoscopes because of which infection got transmitted to the patient because of infection which was remaining or bacteria which were remaining within the elevator channel of the duodenoscope. So recently, a company called Boston Scientific, they have launched this single-use or disposable duodenoscope, which is also called as the EXALT system. And this is in fact the first demonstration of the EXALT system, which was done in United States. The first publication of the EXALT or the disposable duodenoscope came from Professor Muthuswamy from United States. This procedure is performed at the Florida Hospital. You see here, in a few months' time, the EXALT disposable duodenoscope is likely to be launched in our country. I do not know how much it will be effective in India, because in India, there is a possibility that it may become a little bit expensive. However, in those patients who can afford it, and where we definitely are, where the patient's immunity level is low, we want to use a disposable equipment. This can become a good technology to be used. What was lacking till now, that we have progressed so much in diagnosis as well as in intervention. However, if you ask me personally, this is something which was what I can call as a dream scope. And if we have a flexible endoscope, which has got multiple arms like this, and you can do various types of procedures by using all these multiple arms, because by using a traditional endoscopic technology, major interventional procedures, we do have some limitations because we do not have triangulation like a surgeon. We cannot lift and we can cut. We cannot retract. So if you have an endoscope like this, where you can have a triangulation, a multi-armed flexible robotic endoscope, I think this is likely to be the future. In fact, just before this pandemic of corona started, and just before this lockdown started, I was myself exposed, and I myself exposed to this new technology of one of the world's first multi-armed robotic endoscopes, on which I personally had a hands-on training. You can see here, by using these two robotic arms, the robot is somewhere else, we can actually perform a dissection. You can do a triangulation, you can lift and you can cut. You can see here. So in case this does come into clinical practice, which is very likely to happen in the next 1 year, I have a feeling endoscopists are going to enter into a totally new dimension, a totally new orbit. What I personally call is flexible endoscopic surgery. So whether you are a physician, whether you are a surgeon, whether you are a hardcore endoscopist, slowly, if endoscopic, interventional endoscopy is going to be your passion, we have to start adapting ourselves to various types of technologies. All said and done, I just want to share with you one slide. This was a picture which was put on the journal GI Endoscopy many years back, where even that time it was predicted that in many procedures, in many types of diseases which affect the GI tract, endoscopy is going to be the prime modality of treatment and surgeon will be a standby. I just want to warn all of you that in spite of all the progress and in spite of all the advances in technique as well as technology, we have to be extremely prudent and select our patients properly. Only because we can perform a particular procedure does not mean that we should do it. There are certain types of illnesses, certain types of ailments still which require surgery, and surgery is the best solution for them. So therefore, endoscopy has to be only reserved for those who were peer reviewed and proper controlled studies have shown, or evidence has shown, that it is going to have benefit. So unless these procedures are going to be beneficial with a low chances of adverse events, we should not unnecessarily attempt them. And we have to remember the words of Peter Cotton, who repeatedly said that in spite of all this, it is important to see the patient as a whole, not just the hole in the patient. All said and done, friends, ladies and gentlemen, we are going through a completely different era. Even though we feel like performing major procedures, even for a simple diagnostic procedures, this is what we are looking like now. And these are photos taken from our own department of my own colleagues who are performing endoscopic procedures. And it is not easy to perform procedures wearing these extremely difficult PPE kits and long procedures which are interventional in nature. We do not know, we are going through unprecedented times. However, taking all possible precautions, selecting our patients properly, doing proper investigations before, and taking all possible precautions, we have no choice but to proceed with an extreme note of positivity. So with this sentence, I would like to take your leave, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Mahadev, for that wonderful presentation, and with all those videos showing how endoscopy has changed over time, how endoscopy and the interventions related to endoscopy have changed. So now we have many comments coming from the participants saying how much they like the presentation, including one from Nepal, and we have many questions coming in. So I'll take them one by one. And in the meantime, if you have any questions to all the participants, if you have any questions, you can type your questions either in the Q&A window or the chat window, and we'll take those questions. So our first question is, in case of in situ adenocarcinoma, should we consider EMR or ESD or surgery for a colonic lesions 10 centimeter from anal verge?
In situ means what? If it is an early cancer, even if it is in the colon, on suspicion which you see, then you can go ahead to do a ESD. Because if this is a proven malignancy, then endoscopic submucosal dissection is the right approach.
Okay, sir. Moving on to the next question. So, serious complications. Participant has asked about the serious complications of ESD, if any.
Serious complications of ESD?
Yes, sir.
Serious complications of ESD, number one is perforation. So that is entirely dependent on your technique and indication. For example, if you are doing ESD in a lesion which appears infiltrated, and if you try to dissect out the infiltrated area, then you will create a complication like a perforation. For some endoscopists, perforation is not a serious complication because they will do a full thickness resection. However, for the common endoscopist, perforation is a serious complication. Second can be bleeding. If you are not in the right plane while doing the endoscopic submucosal dissection, there can be very brisk bleeding which can happen. And that bleeding will prevent you from further progressing with the procedure because you will not be able to stop the bleeding. So while doing ESD, remaining in the right plane is very important, where instead of seeing the branches of the vessel, you see the trunk of the vessel. You should go at the place where you're seeing the trunk of the vessel, coagulate it, and then proceed.
Right, sir. So there is one question. What should be the length of myotomy in achalasia type 1, 2, and 3?
In achalasia type 1, the length of esophageal myotomy should be only 4 centimeters. So lower esophageal sphincter and 3 to 4 centimeters in the body. In the stomach side, 2 to 3 centimeters. But in the type 2 esophagus, around 7 centimeters on the body. Type 3, it should go almost 12 to 15 centimeters.
So one question from Dr. Sukanta, how could we measure length of myotomy in third space endoscopy?
How could we?
Measure length of myotomy in third space endoscopy.
Oh, that is very easy because you have markings on the scope. So, right, beginning of myotomy to end of myotomy, you push the scope inside. You will come to know how much is the length of myotomy. That's quite easy. But myotomy length, you don't have to be absolutely accurate. Instead of 7 centimeters, if it is 7.5, it doesn't matter. If it is 8, it does not matter.
So we have many questions coming on WhatsApp as well. So one from Dr. Utkarsh, Mumbai. When can we expect the introduction of robotics in India? And what is the accuracy level with AI in colonoscopies?
Accuracy levels of AI in colonoscopy are almost 99%. Accuracy levels of AI to detect a polyp, almost 99%. Because if you can see the area properly, then the accuracy is proper, because now these artificial intelligence systems are quite developed. The second question, what was the first one you said?
So when can we expect the introduction of robotics in India?
Oh, not at least for 1 more year. The flexible robotic, not at least for 1 more year.
Okay. So Dr. Nitin has asked, in future, what skills would be required by endoscopists to excel in the field of gastroenterology with all these technologies coming in?
You only need a good hand-eye coordination, and you need a very stable mind. So if you have a hand-eye coordination, it's not necessary that you are a surgeon. Even if you are a gastroenterologist, most of these procedures are being done by gastroenterologists. But if you are a surgeon, surgeons inherently have a hand-eye coordination, especially surgeons who are using instruments like laparoscopy. So for surgeons, it becomes inherently easier. But even a gastroenterologist does it extremely well and equally well. So you don't require any special skills. You have to get a proper teacher. That is very important.
So Dr. Sitaram Chaudhary from Nepal has asked, is GERD-X better than ARMS for GERD endotherapy?
Both are different. GERD-X is an easier procedure than ARMS, because ARMS is a labor-intensive procedure. Because piece by piece mucosa you have to resect. And if you don't resect it properly, if you resect too much, you will have a stricture. If you resect too deep, you will have a perforation. So it's entirely operator dependent. GERD-X is instrument dependent. However, GERD-X is in evolution. We have plenty of patients where we have performed plenty of procedures. But in some patients, we have found that it can give pain, retrosternal pain. In one patient, we have had bleeding after GERD-X because the place of the clip where we have put the clip, it eroded in a gastroduodenal artery branch, and patient developed a pseudoaneurysm. So we had to do embolization. So all procedures I told you are not risk-free. So you have to select the area properly. You have to know which area to pull inside, and then even the procedure is simple, you have to know how to do it properly.
So there is another question regarding the complications of GERD-X, sir.
I told you, these are the complications of GERD-X. One is chest pain after the procedure. Second is some patients have burping, very funnily, similar to what you get after a laparoscopic fundoplication. They have unexplained burping. And third is pleural reaction, chest pain. Sometimes they have pleural reaction, because sometimes when you apply the clip and the staple on the lesser curvature side, they have a pleural reaction. They have sometimes pleural effusion. So we have to put these patients of anti-inflammatory sometimes for a few days.
Right. So there is one more question regarding GERD-X endotherapy. Is pH measurement and impedance study must for GERD-X endotherapy?
Yes, definitely must. And even motility is a must. Not only pH. Because for any therapy by which you are tightening the lower esophageal sphincter, it is important to know that the esophageal motility is proper. Because if the esophageal motility is impaired, and if you do tightening, patient will have dysphagia. So that's the problem. So we have to make sure that is proper. You have to confirm that there is a pH, abnormal pH study, and this patient deserves an anti-reflux procedure. Then we do the procedure.
So one question from Pallavi Garg, what is the selection criteria for patients for ARMS and patients for